George Waugh, and Bruce Taub. Also present are the building commissioner of the town of Orleans, Thomas Evers, and the board secretary, Stacy Faber.
Michael, this is Jerry Mulligan. I'm on too.
Excuse me, and Mr. Yes, and Gerald Mulligan is present. We have 5 members present, all of whom will consider the 2 items which are on the agenda. And we'll proceed directly to case number 2138. That's the application of Mark Hagopian for a special permit as set forth in General Laws, Chapter 48, Section 6, and the zoning, other bylaws sections of the Orleans Code, 164.3CB, 164.21A, 164.21C, to raise and replace a single-family dwelling. The existing dwelling and the proposed dwelling are non-conforming with respect to lot and yard requirements, particularly with respect to the setback to the top of a coastal bank. This property is located at 25 High Tide Lane, Orleans map number 36, parcel number 146. The application was filed on behalf of the applicant by David Little from Ryder and Wilcox, who is present at the meeting also. Would you like to proceed? Oh, excuse me. Does any member of the board have you been in communication with the applicant or any of the applicant's agents, which would ought to be disclosed to the board or to the public, or would any other fact which would constitute a conflict of interest?
No.
No positive response. Therefore, I declare that the board is impartial and indifferent. And you may proceed, Mr.
Michael, are you going to do the minutes, or those going to come at the end?
They will come at the end, Glenn.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. David Little from Ryder and Wilcox, members of the board. So I had a little difficulty connecting, and fortunately, I got a link from Sarah Eaton. So also attending this meeting and is Sabella Santagruel, the architect, who is noted as being David Little, as well as Mark Hagopian and Melanie Allen, who is noted as being David Little on the screen because I shared my links with them. So I think you can tell by looking who's who. So that being said, we provided the zoning board with several materials to support the application: a project narrative, a dwelling rendering and elevations prepared by Sabel, a site plan by Ryder and Wilcox containing all the pertinent zoning data, a restoration plan by Wilkinson Ecological Design, and a copy of the Conservation Commission Order of Conditions. So we did get approval from the Conservation Commission. It took several meetings because of the sensitive nature of this lot, but I did include the orders via email to the secretary and the chairman. So I hope you've all had a chance to see them. So unfortunately for Mark and Melanie, their dwelling was damaged severely by a fire on Thanksgiving of last year. And the resulting water damage to the dwelling is, needless to say, it's catastrophic. So one of the things that the Mass State Building Code requires is that when you invest more than 50% of the value of the dwelling back into the dwelling, it has to become FEMA compliant. And so that was the case with Mark and Melanie. So they retained Ryder and Wilcox and Sabella Santagruel, and we worked to come up with a plan that is FEMA compliant, that was eventually approved by the Conservation Commission. So the project itself includes the removal of an existing 5-bedroom dwelling and the construction of a new 3-bedroom dwelling, site grading, landscaping, and site restoration. The finished floor elevation of the new dwelling will be 16.5, providing it with approximately 2.5 feet of freeboard above the flood elevation in this area of 14. So FEMA recommends raising the first floor elevation above the flood elevation extra if you can, and we had the opportunity to do it here. So, well, it may appear that the existing house, for those of you that got to visit the site, is, well, the existing house is smaller than what is proposed. The actual habitable floor space for the proposed dwelling is slightly smaller than what exists. Currently, Mark and Melanie have a complete finished basement on the lower walkout level of this dwelling. And when we bring it into FEMA compliance, we are required to provide flood vents in the lower level. We can't have any machinery in the lower level. It can only be used for storage. So they have a full basement underneath this, part of which is a garage, which is allowed. But all of the habitable space for the proposed dwelling has to be elevated above the flood zone. So believe it or not, we have, according to Sibel's numbers, we have approximately 12 square feet less habitable space in the new dwelling than we do in the existing dwelling. Sibel's plans, one of the factors that the Conservation Commission likes, they have a aesthetic component with their regulations. They like buildings to blend in with the surrounding areas. So one thing that they were pleased with is the fact that Sibel and the applicants chose natural and muted colors for the building itself. It's glass and the exterior elements are dark to try and get it to blend in, much more so than the white understory or white lower level and white trim on the existing building. The site itself, because it's in a flood zone, it floods during extreme storm events. Once since Mark and Melanie have owned the property, the entire yard flooded all the way up to High Tide Lane. And so one of the things that we've done with Wilkinson Ecological Design is we've created a wet meadow on the site. We're going to be doing some regrading on the site to provide a very robust way to deal with floodwaters when they enter into the lot and then go back out again. Additionally, one of the things that Mark and Melanie have proposed are they're going to take it upon themselves to maintain a catch basin, which is located in High Tide Lane in the low area, because when it's not maintained, water can back up and cause a significant puddle in that area. So that is one of the conditions of the Conservation Commission approval. And then lastly, the dwelling itself, we feel, is the impacts that it's going to have on the natural, the area surrounding it, and the things that the conservation were particularly concerned about. They're reducing the number of bedrooms from 5 to 3. So this will reduce the effluent that will be going into the septic system. The septic system was inspected when it was purchased, and it did pass inspections. So there will be a reduction in human impacts on the property. And so that being said, I'm gonna go to some of the data that I noted in the special permit application relative to why we are here. So the existing dwelling is located 21.2 feet from the north property line, where a 25-foot setback is required. The new dwelling will be located 23.9 feet from the northerly property line, where a 25-foot setback is required. So we are reducing a 3.8 foot nonconformity to 1.1 foot. The coverage requirements of the town are being met with this proposal. Both the existing house and the proposed dwelling have large eaves and overhangs. And for the purposes of the coverage calculations that I provided to Tom Evers and the zoning board, we have 10.7% existing and 12.5% proposed if you don't take into account the eaves. But even if we are to take into account the eaves, because of the architectural style of the dwelling, the new coverage still complies with the 15% maximum of the zoning bylaw. So then relative to coverage, we comply. And then finally, we're here because of the coastal setback requirement. The existing building height is 18.9, requiring a setback of 28.4, where we have a 17-foot setback. And the proposed building height is 33.4, requiring a setback of 50.1, and we are proposing a 20.1 foot setback. And I would like to point out to the zoning board that we currently have a conforming setback to High Tide Lane. It is, we conform with the 25-foot setback requirement. So the new dwelling is proposed to be located 25.6 feet from High Tide Lane. So we're moving it as close as we can, but we don't have the ability to move it any farther away from the top of the coastal bank because we conform to High Tide Lane. If we were to try and move it closer to High Tide Lane, that would have triggered a variance requirement, and we wanted to stay within the parameters of a special permit request. So as to the special permit criteria for the site, we believe it's adequate for the new dwelling. The proposed building coverage complies with the coverage requirements of the zoning bylaw. We believe the site is suitable for the raise and replace. The Conservation Commission placed several conditions on the project to ensure the protection of the sensitive area in which it is located. There would be no new impact on traffic flow or safety. The design and the location of the new dwelling, we believe, are in compliance with other neighborhood dwellings and similar features of other projects. There is another modern house, or I should say contemporary house, right around the corner from this. The new dwelling ensures a continued view of the pond for the neighbor to the rear, and the design, while modern, is in keeping with other homes in the area. One of the things that ever since Mark and Melanie moved in here, they were cognizant of the man that lives, or the neighbors that live on the opposite side of High Tide Lane in a higher topographical area, and they've always been aware of his view, and they've gone out of their way to maintain his view of the water. The adequacy of utilities and public services are not impacted by the project. The site has a Title V sewage disposal system, and the site incorporates a very appropriate way to infiltrate stormwater runoff from tidal events, as well as significant rainwater events. We believe there will be no noise or litter other than temporary noise impacts during construction, and a dumpster would remain on site to contain all construction debris. And as I mentioned earlier, as to the impact of groundwater quality, recharge volume, and water quality of coastal and freshwater bodies, we worked, as I said, we had several meetings with the Conservation Commission on this, and we provided you with a very robust set of plans by Wilkinson Ecological Design to ensure the protection of this sensitive site. So, Mr. Chairman, that would be my presentation. Sibel Santagruel, the architect, is available for comments, as well as the owners. And as I mentioned early on, this is all triggered by the unfortunate event of a fire that occurred last Thanksgiving when they were entertaining friends within the house. So thank you very much.
Thank you, David. I have the building coverage after your work to be 12.5%, including overhangs. Is that the number? That's what the site plan had anyway. Is that
Well,
correct?
the site plan states that it's 12.5% excluding overhangs.
Very well.
Including the overhangs, it's 14.7%, Mr. Marnick.
14.7%, including overhang.
Yes, sir.
Very well. So I take it that the part of the FEMA compliance is to allow the water in the case of flood tides or flood events to wash right through the basement. Is that
Yes, in Sibel's design of the house, there are 14 flood vents that have to be placed within 1 foot of the exterior grade and within 1 foot of the slab of the inside of the building, because one of the triggers is you're not supposed to impede the flow of floodwaters, because if they occur, it could create collateral damage for a neighbor. So yes, that's correct. The nice thing about the flood vents that they create today is that, for all intents and purposes, they're critter proof and wind proof. They come with floats in them. So in the event you do get a storm event, the floats start to rise and the doors open and allow water to come in and then water to escape. But fortunately for the homeowner, it's a relatively safe foundation otherwise.
And part of the site work involved the installation of a wet meadow. Can you explain that just for me? I think I didn't understand that after reading Wilkinson's.
So what happens now is that, or what happened one time, the water overtopped the small berm in front of the house. And when that happens, they have a small pipe that's located right underneath the dock that allows the water to escape. But in addition to that, they have kind of a bowl where the water just sat. So what we proposed was to regrade the property from the north to the south, and Wilkinson Ecological Design created a wet meadow. And the plants are such that when the stormwater comes over the top of the berm, or even if rainwater was to come down High Tide Lane and come onto the property, the water would go through the wet meadow, where it would collect any suspended solids and sediments. And then as it rises up, it would go over the bank and then back into Meeting House Pond much cleaner, because as you know, during a storm event, you get suspended solids and stuff. And so this is a natural way to allow the water to return, because it's so low, there's really no other way to accommodate the stormwater runoff.
To make sure I understand the setback from the coastal bank issue, what I understand is building height, because it's going to be so much taller, requires a greater setback, therefore there's a greater nonconformity, but the building has to be that high because of FEMA requirements. Am I getting it right?
Yes, you are, Ms. Eicholt. That's exactly right. The building height, for the purposes of the building definition from the street, we comply with the 30-foot height requirement, but the coastal bank setback, we do not. And fortunately, you are allowed to intensify a nonconformity, and we are doing so in this case via a special permit.
David, could I pick up on that for a bit? I was always of the mind that the Conservation Commission was equally concerned about protecting the coastal bank setback as we were. What kind of discussion did they have about this dramatic increase in height and this dramatic increase in nonconformance with the setback. But was that a discussion of at the
It
commission?
was, I believe, 5 hearings of discussion, Mr. Mulligan, and we came in with the original building was a little bit bigger. We did make concessions, but I think the bottom line here is they understood that in order to build a building that is FEMA compliant, everything had to be elevated above the basement. And so they did understand that the actual habitable space in this house is less than what's there. And I felt that Sibel's design, you can see her 3D elevation that we proposed. The exterior elements are dark and they blend in with the natural surroundings. We had to provide, as you can see from the Wilkinson ecological design plans and our site plan, Mark and Melanie are doing a significant amount and going to a significant expense to mitigate for being able to rebuild a house that burned down. So I think that came into their thinking, Mr. Mulligan.
Thank you. Going back to the philosophical discussion that we had in the last meeting that you were part of, I don't know where this leaves us on this coastal setback. Every hearing we're having lately is about that issue, and increasingly it's being overlooked, I guess.
Well, I think that's one of I think the applicants are fortunate that you are allowed to intensify a nonconformity via a special permit. And I think there are extraordinary circumstances here, not only with the fact that their house burned down, but also the fact that they can't reuse their walkout basement as habitable space. It all has to be elevated up.
Yeah, David, and correct me if I'm wrong, I understood that the actual distance from the proposed new structure to the top of the coastal bank remained the same.
No, it's increased, Mr. Marnick. It's currently 17 feet and we're going to 20.1 feet.
Okay. But
So the distance,
as Ms. Eckholt was carefully pointing out, that because of the increased height, that still wasn't enough to.
that's correct. And as I mentioned, we pushed
still
it,
increasing the non-conformity.
and we pushed it back as close as we could. I'm sorry.
Is actually great.
And we pushed it back as close as we could to the street. And that gave us at least 3.1 more feet that we could move it away from the top of the bank.
Any other questions?
Mr. Marnick, I have some questions.
Please, can you proceed?
I want to preface this by saying that I'm impressed by the attention that the applicants have given to detail and to consideration of this. And I would like to also preface it by talking, as we have been, about the tension of wanting to facilitate and enable special permits like this within the confines of our duty to the bylaws. And I am confused by the order of conditions. And so I would like to direct my questions to that, if I may. In the order of conditions, I saw that in 15, where it referred to coastal banks, there was under proposed alteration and permitted alteration, something about 140 feet, square feet. Could someone please explain that to me? I don't understand it.
So one of the things that that I failed to mention, Mr. Taub, was that the prior owner of this property, the berm that exists that runs along the coastal bank between the house and Meeting House Pond, he brought used creosoted timber piles from the adjoining boatyard over and buried them and built the berm on top of them. So one of the things that the Conservation Commission is requiring of the applicants is that they remove all of the buried creosoted timber piles and some buried concrete that we found in the coastal bank. And that may be the length of the bank that is being altered in the order of conditions.
I'm not sure I understand that because of the square footage reference. It doesn't seem like a linear reference, but again, I'm not understanding it.
I'm gonna pull it out. I'll be right with you.
Could I ask a second question while you're pulling it out?
By all means.
In the order of conditions B, number 3, where it talks directly about the buffer zone, it says shortest distance between limit of project disturbance and the wetland resource area specified in 310 CMR 10.021. And it says 0 linear feet. What does that 0 refer to?
It means that we're working immediately adjacent to the resource area. There is no setback.
Well, then the follow-up question is, what point of the building, including porches, overhangs, etc., is closest to a protected wet bank in linear feet?
The deck is the proposed deck is the closest, and that's 17 feet from the top of the coastal bank. But please keep in mind that the entire lot is located in the Pleasant Bay ACEC, which is a resource area, and the entire lot is in a flood zone, which is a resource area. So there were significant hurdles that we had to go through with the Conservation Commission to do this.
And in the end, they signed off on the deck being as close as 17 feet from the coastal bank.
The existing deck is 17 feet from the coastal bank. The proposed deck is 20.1 feet from the coastal bank.
Okay.
Yes.
Right.
I think it really boils down to the significant, not only the restoration plan by Wilkinson Ecological Design, but their land management plan, their 3-year land management plan to improve the wildlife habitat on this site. The numbers are striking. If you look at the restoration plan by Wilkinson Ecological Design and the green hatching that we provide that shows on that plan, there is a very small remaining portion of the lot within which the applicants are going to be able to use. We're eliminating a tremendous amount of lawn, and we're replacing it with woody shrubs and other grasses and wildlife habitat and trees. Trees are proposed between the dwelling and Meeting House Pond to further filter the views of what the building looks like from Meeting House Pond. Trees are proposed on the landward side of the dwelling to screen the views there as well.
Through the chair, if I may add something, this is Sibella Shanturul, SA Architecture.
Please.
Thank you. In reference to your question about the deck, sir, in addition to the distances that Dave Little gave you, the areas that's really critical, that's closest to the top of the bank, those are actually overhangs as well. So we have about the whole concept of this design was to improve the site, to take advantage of the opportunity to design a house that would not create new nonconformities, improve on the major nonconformities, and make it compliant with FEMA. So wherever we could, we also, as with the decks, and on the side, to the north side of the building, there are overhangs. So actually, it doesn't touch the ground.
My last question, actually, in this regard is to Mr. Evers. As you reviewed the application, do you have any residual concerns? Does anything leap out to you, sir?
No, it's the same thing I went over with David. Same plan. I mean, if you can be more specific.
No, that actually probably satisfies me. Thank you. I mean, you sent him off with this plan to the Conservation Commission, yes?
Well, he went because he knew he had to go. Yes. I mean, it's a very difficult site all around,
Understood.
both building code and conservation wise.
Mhm.
So I had one more question, and it relates to my last one. Since there's sort of an intensifying a nonconformity, the only way that you could not intensify it is to make a much, much smaller house and knock off the third floor. Is that right? Pretty much?
Yes,
You'd end up, because the third floor is, well, there's the basement, the first floor, the second floor. I'm calling it the third.
yes,
Right. You could just knock, and that has a bedroom and a bath, and you'd have to make it a 2-bedroom house, presumably, in order to not make it so tall.
yes. And another thing that I would like to point out is, as I mentioned earlier, the applicants are very cognizant of the neighbor on the other side of High Tide Lane. And there is a deck above the garage. So he can not only look over that deck, we did not want to extend the structure so it covered a significant portion of the lot, because neighborhood, you have to be aware of other people in the neighborhood when doing a project and coming before the zoning board. So we really tried to bring something in that was respectful of everybody.
Yeah, so you could have made it wider instead of taller, but then the view would have been blocked.
Yes.
I let the record reflect that the board is in possession of a letter of David F. Onimus and Virginia G. Onimus, dated October 1st, 2020, asking us to vote in favor of the project. They're in favor of themselves. Their address is listed as 11 Grist Road, Orleans. David, are those the folks that have the deck that whose view was preserved?
No, it is not. But they are within the 300-foot. They are an abutter that was noticed with the application.
All right. Is there anyone present wishing to speak in favor or in opposition or in commentary upon the project? Members of the board, do you have any further questions of the applicant?
Mm-mm.
Very well, then I think we can close the hearing for the taking of evidence and ask the sense of the board.
I will make a motion to approve. This seems like a very difficult site, and no matter what you do, you'd cause a problem in another area, and they've done the very best they can. And I do, having been involved extensively with Wilkinson on a rehabilitation of property, my heart goes out to you. Yes, it's very expensive. So, but it looks like it will be much better. And the intensifying the nonconformity, even though they are doing that, it seems like the best choice was made.
I agree
There
with
is an attendee with his hand raised, just so you know. Under
Oh.
attendees, Mr. McKenzie has his hand raised.
what was that again? I didn't hear that.
There's someone in the attendees who has his hand raised, presumably to
Oh.
talk.
Is Mr. McKenzie, can we hear from you? I didn't realize that you wished to comment, and I'm not excluding you.
Yes, Mr. Marnick, thank you for the opportunity to speak. My wife and I have the property immediately adjacent to Mr. Zurhagopian's property. We're at 31 High Tide Lane. And we have followed this process all the way through. I would say that they have been excellent neighbors, and they have been very solicitous of us in terms of what they wanted to do and how they were going to do it. And they certainly asked for our input. And we have studied the plans, the building plan that's been submitted. We've submitted we have studied the ecological plan. We have studied the landscaping plan. And as we look at this, this is a vast, vast improvement over what is there. As has been pointed out, the number of bedrooms has been reduced from 5 to 3. They have commissioned a 3-year ecological plan to clean up some of the invasive species, which have really overgrown many parts of the lot. As I read it, they're going to plant something like 11 new trees, 66 shrubs. They're going to install a wet meadow to take care of the flooding and the lowland that goes on there, much of which is caused by the catch basin in the street, which has been neglected by the town or whoever is responsible for maintaining that, to the point that even when you get a moderate rain, it backs up and floods not only their property, but the town lot next to it. So they've put in a wet meadow to abate that. The home they're designing is much more aesthetically pleasing than what was there before. It's a significant improvement over a house that had been there for many years and had been a bit run down. And I think for all of those reasons, we wholeheartedly support what they want to do and would urge the board to approve their special permit. And as I think was already mentioned before, they wouldn't even be here but for the fact that they suffered a very unfortunate and tragic fire to their property on Thanksgiving Day last year. We were there, we helped them, but it was a tough thing. But again, we wholeheartedly support this and would ask the board to approve their petition for a special permit. And I thank you for the opportunity to speak.
And thank you for speaking, Mr. McKenzie. And I'm sorry that I didn't mean to overlook you. Lynn, did you make a motion?
I did. I made a motion to approve.
Then I'm looking for a second here.
I'll second.
The second to the motion. I agree with Lynn and Bruce. And the neighbors, as it turns out, this is one a very diligent proposition. The application was published in accordance with the zoning law, and no one has come to oppose it. And the thoroughness of the presentation is impressive, where we're able to also see, we were able to determine two things. One is that the view from the house in behind is the view of the Meeting House Pond is not obscured. And as a matter of fact, the view from Meeting House Pond has been disclosed to us. So, and that's something that probably may or may not have been any of our business, except that now we can conclude very easily that the design is consistent with the neighborhood. So I'm in favor of it myself. Any other commentary?
Yeah, I'll support the motion also, but I will say that I don't know where this leaves us on coastal setback. I'm very surprised that the Conservation Commission has put themselves in a box, but I don't know if they care about precedent. I don't know where this leaves us, Dave, with your next 20 applications on the coastal setback. But because this is, I don't think we'll find one this extreme again. I don't know, maybe we will, but this is a pretty extreme burden on the coastal setback. And as a precedent for this board, I hope it's not a new precedent, but I'm sympathetic to the problems the homeowners have and to the problems the lot have, and there's no other solution really for them. I'm impressed with I did like the architectural drawing, the way it sort of fits into the landscape there. I applaud that being part of the application. So I will go along with it, and I just hope it doesn't put us in a box in future applications about the coastal setback.
Any other comments or we'll call for a vote then? Very well, then all those in
Mr.
favor?
Martin, for one quick second.
Yes,
I just want to support what Mr. Mulligan just said about the burdens that we keep facing. The last time we addressed this question, if I understood the board correctly, we were proceeding on what we understood to be very much, for lack of a better word, a subjective case-by-case basis. And that doesn't feel all that comfortable. I'll leave it at that. I just wanted to add that comment. Thank you, sir.
very well. I think we all understand that.
Yes.
All those in favor? Oh, excuse me, we need to poll the, since this is a virtual meeting, we need to poll the members. Mr. Marek, I vote to approve. Ms. Eckholt,
Yes.
Mr. Mulligan,
Yes.
Mr. Wall,
Yes,
Mr. Top.
Yes.
Then the motion carries unanimously to a special permit to issue running with the land without conditions. Failing any volunteering, I will write the opinion.
Congratulations to the homeowners.
Very well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time, everybody. Thank you.
Members of the board, we have,
Michael, if you want me to write the opinion, I'll be happy to do that with your guidance. It's my first one, so.
I think what I'll do, if in that case, I will send you privately by email a draft of the either with the template or a draft of what might be appropriate for this hearing.
Oh, very good, good. Be happy to do that.
So we were on mute, sorry.
can you hear us? Mark and Melanie?
Yeah.
We want to thank everybody for your time. We really appreciate it. We've gone,
We tried really hard.
yeah, to improve the lot. We really think it'll look great when we're done.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. I appreciate your happiness.
Thank you.
Members of the board, I have now, we all have actually, the case number 2139. Now, this is the application of Robert Stein and Maura Smith, or at least one of the owners, perhaps a trust, which the application is for a special permit as set forth in General Laws, Chapter 48, Section 6, under zoning bylaws. 164 3CB, 164 21AC, to renovate and add on to a single-family residential structure that is non-conforming with respect to the setback to the top of a coastal bank. This property is located at 13 Archer Lane, map number 52, parcel number 6, in the Orleans scheme of numbering and locating parcels on maps. Let me ask if any member of the board has had any communication with the applicant or any of the applicant's agents, which ought to be disclosed to the board, the public, or any other fact which would constitute a conflict of interest. Tonight, I hear no positive response, and therefore I declare that all 5 members of the board who are present are indifferent and impartial. David Little.
Thank you very much. Interestingly enough, this special permit has to deal with the setback to the top of a coastal bank. But it's definitely different than the past one. I don't know what to say about the regulation when it was adopted. But I'm going to do my best to explain this special permit on its own merits and hopefully convince you that it's worthy of a special permit. Again, this project did go before the Conservation Commission. It took a couple of meetings to get through. Bob Stein and Maura Smith, the owners of the property, are reusing the existing building to the biggest extent feasible. They're proposing to renovate the structure itself, and the additions that are proposed go out on the westerly side and they go out on the northerly side away from the coastal bank. Interestingly enough, this house's setback to the top of the coastal bank is 0 because the deck extends over the bank. We provided you with a site plan that shows where we're proposing a screen porch on top of the deck, 2 additions on the west and a proposed porch on the front. And we provided you with elevation plans prepared by Peter McDonald, which show how we are increasing the height slightly. The height of the building is going from 17.2 feet to 23.5 feet. It's very modest when you think of the height of a building. 23.5 is well below the 30-foot height restriction. And the coastal setback calculation, the existing building height would require a setback of 25.8. The proposed building's height would require a setback of 35.3, but they are proposing to work within the existing footprint, maintain the existing decks, and really try and use as little of this property as possible. They're only proposing to develop approximately 1/4 of the 1.4 acre site that they're on. The entire rest of the site remains natural. One of the things that they endeavored with the Conservation Commission is that they did not want to exceed 25% expansion within the existing dwelling. The Conservation Commission, if you do exceed 25% increase in square footage or 25% increase in volume, it's considered new construction. So we worked with the architect to ensure that the expansion was less than 25% increase of what existed, both in area and volume. So it wasn't an easy thing to do. They, as you could see if you visited the site, it's a very modest house. They're working in all the work is occurring within disturbed areas. With respect to and the plans also show an elevation view of what it looks, a 3D view of what it looks like on the third page of the plans that I provided you. As to the special permit criteria, as I stated earlier, the 1.41 acre site is adequate because the developed portion of the property is only 1/4 of the total site area. The site is suitable for the expansion. The resulting building coverage of 2,333 square feet is only 6.7% of the buildable upland. There would be no new impact on traffic flow. There is a negligible impact on neighborhood visual character as the property is located at the end of Archer Lane. The property has a relatively new Title V sewage disposal system. It's served by town water, and there are no stormwater drainage issues created by the proposed project. Utilities and public services are not impacted by the project. There would be no noise or litter other than temporary noise or litter during construction, and a dumpster would remain on site at all times to contain all construction debris. One of the things that the Conservation Commission required in their approval, that the existing lawn goes right up to the edge of the top of the coastal bank. So they asked that we plant that area with native shrubs. So they are proposing to plant low bush blueberries in that area. And the Conservation Commission did issue an order of conditions for the work, ensuring the protection of the groundwater quality, recharge volume, and water quality of coastal and freshwater bodies. So, well, this is another coastal setback request. The only trigger is that section of the bylaw, and we are intensifying a nonconformity slightly, but we feel that what is proposed here is modest. It has no impact whatsoever on any of the neighboring houses or properties. So that would be my presentation, Mr. Marnick and members of the board. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, actually, the physical distance is still 0. So the way that the nonconformity is being increased is because the height is increased, and therefore the formula requiring the actual setback is increased. Is that the fair way of putting it?
Yes, the height of the building is being increased by 6.3 feet.
And therefore the setback is greater than it was before.
That's correct.
There's no physical movement either towards or away. It's still 0.
Not yet. That's correct.
There's no building though in that encroached area? Are we adding mass to the between the bank and the house?
We are adding, yes, we're adding on the westerly side of the dwelling. There is two small additions and a deck. And then there is a screen porch proposed on the right side of the dwelling on top of the existing deck. So yes, we are adding mass and the coverage is increasing, but we have no other nonconformities associated with the building than the coastal bank setback.
Was there any other alternative considered to add, but not, I mean, it's 0, I get it, but I mean, could they just, this would be a lot more expensive, but could they have moved the whole thing back in the property?
They had an opportunity to move it back somewhat, Ms. Eichholt. The building is set back 39.6 feet, or the setback to the proposed porch is 39.6 feet. So yes, you could tear down the building and construct a completely new building. But the problem the homeowners face is if you do that, it's considered new construction, and the Conservation Commission will not allow new construction in the 0 to 50 foot buffer. That is why they went to great pains not to increase the volume or square footage by more than 25%. So it would not be considered new construction. The Conservation Commission regulations are very, very strict when it comes to work. The 0 to 50 foot buffer is a no disturb zone. And that goes right through the north side of the building.
So help me out here, David. I'm looking at this diagram, A 1.2, proposed first floor plan. The existing deck is what's encroaching on the bank, right?
That's correct.
And we're doubling the size of that with a screen porch, basically.
No, the screen porch is being built over the existing deck.
So so under the screen porch is already a deck.
That's correct, Mr. Mulligan.
So it's the height that we're adding to from the visual height from the.
It's the height of the main body of the house that's triggering the coastal bank setback. That in order to create a little bit of space, if you look at the second floor plan, there is a very little space on the second floor that is exceeding is making it go up the 6.3 feet. That's what's forcing us to come here.
Got it. Thank you.
I've received no correspondence from either in support or in opposition to the project. Are there any other questions of members of the board of the applicant? Is there anyone present wishing to speak in opposition to the project? Oh, it looks like someone is.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, could you identify yourself, ma'am?
Yes, my name is Katie Hacks Holmes. Thank you to the board and thank you to the chair for acknowledging my comment as an abutter. We own the property at 9 Archer Lane. My family has owned it for 60 years. I am representing the entire family trust in support of this project by Mr. Stein and Ms. Smith. We look at it as a really respectful solution to restoration and renovation of a really cute house, but it needed to be updated, especially since our new neighbors are living there full time. So we are in absolute full support of their plan and just wanted to say that for the record.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the queue wishing to speak in favor of or in opposition to this application? Sarah, is there anyone else out there?
I don't see anybody. Nope.
Very well. Then we can close the hearing for the taking of evidence, and I ask the sense of the board.
I have no problem with the application and would be in favor of it. And I understand some of the concerns that other members have had, specifically Mr. Mulligan, with respect to the coastal bank. But I think also we're here to do a service to the town and to some of the people that are trying to improve their properties. And from what I can see, it's another excellent presentation that tends to cover all of the issues that we are needed to face. So I feel that they have conformed beautifully to what's necessary. So I'd be in favor.
Thank you, Mr. Warr. I agree with you.
You know, I want to congratulate David on his artful advocacy, because 2 weeks ago, when we had a coastal bank setback with the deck, we blithely agreed to it because visually it was just a deck a little bit above the ground, and there wasn't going to be a roof or a porch as part of that deck. And that was what was the selling argument 2 weeks ago. And now we have the same situation with a deck, with a low profile deck. There's now becoming a high profile porch with a deck above it. screened-in porch. Having said that, I sympathize with George. I think George is sort of right, but I don't know. So the people who were here 2 weeks ago come back and say, oh, I saw what you did this week. We're going to add a screen porch to the deck that we did last week, that we approved 2 weeks ago. I don't know where it ends, once you start nibbling at these things. On the other hand, I'm sympathetic as someone who couldn't raise my property for the Conservation Commission 1 foot. I guess my question is this. People go to these boards and they get rulings and they hear the discussion and the basis of our rulings and the basis of the Conservation Commission rulings, and you get a sense of what you can and can't do. And then you find, you bring in an application, it gets approved, and you find that 2 weeks later, an application comes in with a porch added to the deck. And one of the selling arguments we made 2 weeks ago was that there was no porch, the visual line was just flat. And now there's a porch with a screened-in porch with a deck above it. So does the guy come back who was here 2 weeks ago and say, I want a porch on my deck now? I don't know where you draw the line. It's just a...
Well, I think, and I understand your concern, and maybe part of the problem is the way these regulations are written. It's fairly easy to do exactly what we're doing, and we think it's compliant, but we're concerned. So maybe this is something that some other commission, perhaps the planning board, should try to come up with different regulations that could go before the planning review bureau, the zoning board itself, and see if they should be changed to, if we think it's a loophole, fix it. I understand exactly what you're saying, and it's going to come up again and again and again. So
I'm not sure it's a loophole, George. I just think it's a... David, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Well, if I may, I think with the advent of the Gale decision, where it changed all the purviews of all the zoning boards in Massachusetts, which allows people to intensify a nonconformity, that's when these projects started coming before the board. Prior to that, it was a variance, and I would never in my right mind suggested to a client that you could demonstrate a hardship with a variance for a project like this. So I think it's not so much the town regs, it's what happened with the Gale decision that opened up avenues for applicants that they take advantage of. And with the coastal bank setback, the place that I put my emphasis is the aesthetic component of the Orleans Conservation Commission's regulations, because they want to see buildings blend in with the natural environment. And one of their big things is that you don't have weight trim, that you use natural stain, you use natural siding, so that things do blend in. I will say that when I retire, I'm looking forward to getting on the Zoning Board of Appeals so I can grapple with these things like you do, because I find them very interesting, but I don't know how to advise you. I can only advise my clients based on the regs.
I guess my point is, I don't know how we deny anything now on the coastal bank setback. I don't know how we deny anything. After the previous case was a shocker to me from the Conservation Commission's viewpoint. I'm stunned that they approved that kind of a intensification on the height on the house. Because they had been, as you know, they had been pretty hawkish on heights on coastal properties.
Yes, I know that for a fact.
Yeah, so do I. And now I thought you did a very artful job 2 weeks ago explaining that the low profile of the deck doesn't really violate the setback, the spirit of why we have a setback. And now you're in here with I don't know what the answer is. And
Well, I think the fact that these buildings are non-compliant, they don't comply with the zoning regulations, so they have the zoning board of appeals as a venue to come to try and make changes. And that's why I'm here. And I'm just trying to do the best I can for the applicants. I think that in this case, it's a modest house and it's a modest addition. And I do think that the nonconformity can be granted with no derogation to the intent of the bylaw.
No, I'm with you. I mean, I think George said it well. We're here to help people, and it doesn't try to help them out of these tough boxes. And as long as there's no neighbor objecting, when there's a neighbor objecting, we seem to have a very different standard, which may be appropriate. But I don't want to belabor this either because it's late and we all want to watch the debate. But I don't know what you say to your client of 2 weeks ago, who comes back and says, hey, I have this low profile deck, but there's a lot of bugs in the neighborhood. And I like to sit out there at night, and a nice screened porch on my deck would be really ideal. And this is exactly what this guy is saying. I understand that he needs a screened in porch to sit out there and poach it at night. So anyway, George has convinced me. I'm voting in favor.
Lynn, did you have a remark?
I'm trying to frame my last question, I guess. What worries me is, and I sort of live in the neighborhood around Pochit. And so I know, some of these homes are like right there. On top of, they're really on the ocean. They, in a way that you look at it and say, God, they shouldn't be. And I guess what I don't get, and Dave, this is a question for David, and this is my ignorance. The Conservation Commission will not allow any new building in a 50-foot buffer zone. That's absolute. You cannot do it. Even if you were to move the whole thing back, no. If we exceeded more than 25% of the expansion of the square footage. Yeah, I get it. Yep. Or volume, this would have been considered new construction, and I don't think they would have approved it. They won't approve it, even if you move the house back as far as you could in the property. Well, we don't have the opportunity to move it back here because we have the leaching facility between the house and the road. Okay, so, that's what I was looking for. I wanted to know, is there anything else that could be done for a place that has zero setback? It's on, right there. So no, it's also completely within the area of critical environmental concerns. So there were a number of thresholds that we were concerned about with this. And believe it or not, the applicants went through 2 architects before they could come up with a design that met the 25% threshold. They worked really hard to try and do that, because without the Conservation Commission, I wouldn't be here in front of you.
But the Conservation Commission does allow building within 50 feet. That house on Towey, they had a little 1-story shack closer to the beach. And then they, I don't know if that was yours or not, David. And they were allowed to it was a beach house, a little an ancillary unit on the beach, basically.
Right, across the street from Judge Mulligan.
Exactly. And they moved that back in 50 feet and added a 2nd story to it. And a whole concrete base. It had been a little shack basically on cinder blocks. And that was a shocker. I guess what I'm saying is I think the Conservation Commission has no precedential value, anything they do. And I guess I'm concerned that we're falling into the same box.
I have to say that, the height requirement, I'm willing to overlook or accept. Anything adding to an derogation of the protection of the coastal bank. We had a case a while back, I can't recall the name, that I voted against because of the precedent it was setting. This is a beautiful property. These people have everything they could ask for and more, and now they want a screen porch too. I mean, on the one hand, who gives a damn? And on the other hand, I don't like it philosophically. It doesn't feel correct to me to assent to this kind of increasing, let's call it encroachment. So I'm very challenged here because of this concern that we keep acceding to these things. It's a little bit here and it's a little bit there. Where do we? I mean, I heard Mr. Mulligan's concern about the Conservation Commission, but where does the buck stop?
I don't
have anything further to say other than.
Well, this is a continuation of the previous discussion, and I am becoming increasingly troubled. Now, I have approached over the past 9 years the hearings applying the principles, we'll say, to special permit, which allow a great deal of discretion in the board with taken right out of the zoning bylaw, and we've decided a case by case by case. Now there are members are equally concerned that over the course of time there have been a number of decisions which are creating precedent. Something which was the last thing in my mind as chair while we were facilitating the hearings and deciding applications. I'm very much concerned about 2 or 3 types of issues which come before us all the time, and only recently in a couple of the cases have our previous decisions come back to confront us as having being engraved in stone, something which I never anticipated or expected or intended while chairing this board. I think that in the absence of remaking the permitting process, where planning board, in this case perhaps conservation, and the zoning board were all melded, a holistic approach, which would require a great deal of revamping of the charter, then it has to be done by amendment to the zoning ordinance to one extent, which is the best agency or branch of municipal government to make these decisions. We all know, and overlying this problem of coastal banks is the preservation of the water and the environment. Now, we have measurements which are arbitrarily built into the zoning bylaw, which require setbacks. But now I see that based on a case-by-case basis, we are deviating from the way the town has spoken. We're able to overcome that because there are 14 or 15 factors in a special permit when granting a special permit or failing to grant it, where we have a given discretion. So that is my apology for the situation that is creating this philosophical concern amongst the members.
If I may just get philosophical here for a second, because I hate to keep everybody here, but especially I'd like to hear David's response. As I lived in town and watched these things with some personal interest on some issues and others just intellectual interest, it seems to me that when a project comes into town, they have to go through checking boxes. Let's say you're taking down a little house and building a big house on a nice piece of property. First, you go to the health department and you get them to waive things for the bathrooms or the bedrooms, whatever their bugaboo is. And then you go to a few other boards. You go to the Conservation Commission and you adjust things here and they give you their approval. Then they come to the Zoning Board of Approval. Whereas if you had a holistic look, you'd say, this thing is just too big for this property. And all these things you need waivers for indicates it shouldn't be here. So if you had if it was one process where you could look at it and you say, this doesn't make sense for the town, it's too big. They gave a waiver on the percentage of the land that's being used. They got a waiver on the number of bedrooms, wherever the health department uses these days. And the Conservation Commission liked the fact they're planting trees and marsh. And at the end of the day, everybody gives waivers. And you say, well, maybe this thing shouldn't have happened at all because it needed too many waivers. That's one issue, Each board looks at its own little area, and the big picture is being missed on some of these things. I think I'm not going to name names, but I've seen projects in this town, and I've seen that our board approved them. And I say, oh boy, that really didn't fit in this property, and you look back and they had 4 hearings for the Conservation Commission. They finally threw in the towel, or they did some sort of a plan, and then the zoning board, they got special soil for they put in a new type of septic system that the health department likes, but they go from board to board to board getting exemptions. And if you looked at it from the beginning, you'd say it needs too many exemptions, but we never look at it that way. Just look at them seriatim, one by one. That's my
Well,
Go ahead, Dave.
Currently, we're required to come to you last. You're the final arbiter, and maybe that should be reconsidered. Perhaps I'm not the one. I don't want to change. I don't suggest to change the regulations, but maybe you should get the first bite at the apple. But it's always been historically that we couldn't come before this board unless all the approvals from any other agency in the town have been granted.
I have to say a word here. From my perspective, I think I've been involved in the Zoning Board of Appeals here and in other places for over 25 years. And I personally do not accept the concept of precedent, and I never have. Just because something else was approved does not mean that you approve the next case, because each case has to be handled on its own individual merits. And they're not all exactly the same. There are differences. So that's up to the board to decide if they think that particular case warrants approval or it doesn't. So even the cases that we had today, they affect a certain area, the coastal bank. But if you didn't like it and you had valid reasons for not liking it, then you don't approve it. Precedent, again, personally to me, and as I've been involved in a lot of other cases, has not played a part. And I will also say I have never found a lawyer or Dave or anybody else who will say, well, because you approved A 3 weeks ago, you must approve this today. I have not found that to happen on presentations that come to us. So
George,
that's
let me just come back at that a little bit. I don't want to turn this into a tribunal where we have lawyers throwing back opinions at us, but I do think it nibbles away at people's confidence in the government when you get denied something and then you go across town and you find someone who got approved the same thing that you were denied, or approved in some cases like tonight, approved much more than other people have gotten. The burden in the last case, the burden on the coastal bank was so extreme compared to, I bet, I can't off the top of my head, I bet dozens of people have been denied much less than that. And they go back and they say, hey, look what the Conservation Commission did for those people. I don't get it, you know, and it doesn't, so it doesn't impact our authority to do things, but it does nibble away at people's confidence in the town government.
David?
So, can I ask you a question, Jerry? When you say the burden on the coastal bank, I've always thought of a burden on the coastal bank to be the purview of the Conservation Commission. I'm confused when you say burden from a zoning board member. What do you mean by that? Because
it's probably a bad word, but we did intensify the variance, the variance, yeah, the out of compliance. We did intensify the amount of out of compliance it is. I guess that's a burden, maybe the wrong word. But it's hard to, I mean, that case we just did was, you know, I don't know how you deny anybody anything in the coastal bank if they cite that one. This house was dramatically heightened. This wasn't this case tonight where you had 6 feet or 5 feet, whatever it is. That was almost a doubling of the height in the previous case. That's not incremental.
I have to believe the previous case had extraordinary circumstances.
I agree with you. And we heard all that. But somebody else who didn't get 3 extra feet, or tonight, if we denied tonight, how's the guy you have now before us? How are you going to respond to him when he says, "Oh, they wouldn't give me your porch because it increases the coastal bank setback variance"?
Well, I can tell you all one thing. I'm certainly going to be, any new clients that come before me with a situation like this, I'm certainly going to be relating these concerns to them, because obviously this has become a hot button issue with the board.
Well, I've only been on here a short time compared to most of the people here. But first we started hearing all these cases about people who lost building upland because of the flood plan, okay? Now, and so we sort of addressed that. And now we're getting at this raft of cases about people who want to encroach on the coastal bank. It's almost like, I don't know, there's some subterranean tom-toms. Okay, it's free season, open season now on the coastal bank. Everybody's getting soft on that issue. I don't know. I just think about the guy 2 weeks ago. We went on a lot of conversation about how it really doesn't impact the visual. And the real point of the coastal bank is for visual, okay? And that guy 2 weeks ago, he didn't really impact the visual, the purpose of the setback requirement. His low-level deck wasn't really what the coastal bank setback was meant for. But now he sees tonight, he says, gee, I'd like a nice big screen porch there.
Well, all I can say is that I'm provided with 8 criteria for a special permit to address when I come before the Zoning Board of Appeals. And I honestly believe that with this project, because that's what we're talking about now, I believe it does comply with the 8 criteria that you are charged to address and is worthy of a special permit.
I'm voting for it.
Could I say just a couple of words more, mindful of the time?
Yes.
Thank you. Branching into legal philosophy here, we're often confronted as we think about our own Supreme Court these days with this issue of original intent. And the issue that we're often facing is those who think that we should interpret these laws as they were written then And there are those who think that we should interpret them as we understand them now. And I find it very hard to keep saying yes. And there's something about the screened porch. The difference between the application prior to this and this one was the absolute necessity that was being presented in that case. I don't see the necessity here. And I'm torn. I'm absolutely torn because this is a wonderful opportunity for something as de minimis as a screened porch to be able to say no. And yet it's so de minimis. I just.
But Mr. Taub, necessity is not one of the 8 special permit criteria.
I
You're
understand that, but subjectivity isn't either.
No, I agree. I agree. But if this was to be denied, it would have to be denied based on not meeting the special permit criteria.
It would be denied on the basis that it increases the derogation from the coastal bank requirements as I understand them.
No, I disagree. You actually had a neighbor. You're supposed to protect.
David, I don't mean to interrupt. When you have multi-million-dollar properties that have few neighbors, you can be sure that the neighbors will appreciate improvements in their property of their neighbors. When you have modest houses in crowded conditions, there's a class issue here that we're certainly not going to go into, but that affects my feelings. This is
and I understand that. I agree that you have every right to vote against it. That's your prerogative. But necessity is not one of the reasons that you can't, that it could be denied by the Zoning Board of Appeals. You have 8 criteria. And if you don't meet the 8 criteria, then you can deny it. But one person can certainly vote against it. But I think this application does not warrant, it warrants a special permit. I point out one criteria that it doesn't meet.
This board, David, this board is certainly free to find that the proposed use would be detrimental to the established and future character of the neighborhood and would not be in harmony with the general intent and purpose of the zoning bylaw.
Yes, you could.
I'm sorry. I thought you were inferring that the special permit was should be granted as a matter of right.
No, absolutely not.
All right.
No,
Okay.
absolutely not. But I do. It's common knowledge that one of the first things the zoning board does is look for comments from neighbors and abutters, and that weighs heavily on your decision. And it historically has weighed heavily. Just because Mr. Taub suggests that the tax values might go up for a neighbor in this area, I think that's hogwash.
I didn't say that, sir, and I'd like it withdrawn.
Okay, I withdraw it, but I apologize for that this had to go down this path. But I think it warrants a special permit. Thank you very much. That's all I'm going to say.
Well, let me jump in and say I brought it down this path, and I'm sorry too, because I was trying to be philosophical, and I assume we already had the votes, and this is sort of after the fact. I would make the motion if it hasn't been made to grant the special permit, and it's my own frustration is trying to come up with standards, David, and I was happy to have a discussion with you that didn't violate the open meeting law somehow, and give us. I've enjoyed the discussion. I think.
I apologize for disagreeing with Mr. Taub.
And I'd like to second the motion.
A second by Mr. Wall. Is there any further discussion on the motion? Is there discussion on the motion? Then I'll call for a vote. I vote to approve. Ms. Eckholt. I can't hear you. Ms.
Your
Echo,
microphone's off.
Yes.
Mr. Mulligan,
Yes.
Mr. Wall,
Yes,
Mr. Tom.
No.
Very well. Then the motion carries 4 votes to 1. And I will write the opinion.
Thank you very much.
And Mr. Mulligan, for your convenience, I will also send a draft of this decision for your edification. I appreciate help in opinion writing. I'm a little bit behind and I spent the afternoon catching up.
Well, if you can give me some training on it, I'll be happy to take up some of the burden.
Very well, thank you. Next item of business. Lynn, you reminded us of the minutes.
Yes. I have a couple of comments on minutes.
Yes, please.
And my first is a question though. Can we talk about any comments on the executive session item in the open meeting?
I don't think so.
Okay.
My ruling is we cannot.
Okay, that's what I thought, so I won't then. So the one thing that I wanted to add something that I thought was important to the Atlantic Workshop 2136 in the minutes.
Yes.
And I'm new, so tell me if I'm off base, but I thought it was important to say something about why it ended up not being, it was the motion to deny failed.
Very well.
Okay, I thought there should just be a statement that the attorney for the for Scott Feen
Yes.
pointed out that a court had set a precedent that if you did not include a specific legal citation in a letter of violation, that it would not be, then it would be invalid. And that was the reason. I mean, I think it's important to point that out. That was the reason, I believe, that 2 people voted not to deny the appeal.
That is my memory too.
And I just thought it was important. And what I'm asking is, I'm assuming that the minute should say something about a key issue that the decision turned on, and it's not in here. So
in this case, more than ever, I think it's appropriate because we were, the effect of it was to invalidate or criticize to some extent the action of the building commissioner of the town. And
yes,
having a reason for that purpose, as benign as it seems to be, was appropriate, and I agree completely.
okay,
I will redraft a sentence or two, and I can circulate it for further discussion at our next meeting, but I'll circulate it to the board. We can't respond to it outside of the hearing, but I think I'll try to adopt that. You were pretty specific just now,
okay,
and I think something of that nature is absolutely appropriate.
okay.
Is there any further business to come before the meeting?
I have a request, Mr. Murdock. I think in order to help everybody potentially facilitate generation of decisions, that perhaps as a decision these days is finalized, that the members get a copy of it and perhaps even go back a few cases and put those in our folders and do it in the future so we can read what the actual decision of a case is.
I think before my incumbency, that was the standard practice, and I haven't followed that. And that's a much better practice, managerial and otherwise. I agree with you. I will do that. You know, the reason being is when one or two people are charged with the preparation of the decisions, quite often they're signed off by the writer or the chair and the clerk, file with the town clerk, and the members of the board never see them again, you know? On the other hand, I think behind that is that we prefer not to write the decisions by a committee either, you know?
I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that we see what the final decision was
That's fine.
in case we're ever tasked. Thank
Okay,
you. Okay.
very well.
I have one other question for the group very quickly. Is it permissible for the group to have a discussion at some point about this issue of precedent? Because I am left with a lot of concern about it as well. And I'd just like to have a discussion about how we make decisions and not related to any particular case. Is it possible to have that discussion?
It is. I think it should be in the context of an open meeting though, that was preserved with the ability of the public to
Hear it.
to see.
So, okay.
to
So
see and
at the-
hear. It could never, we've gone as far, frankly, I think we've gone as far as we could tonight without having reference to any particular application. And I would have preferred to have that broader discussion you're suggesting, Lynn, without reference to any specific application. When we have the time, then sooner rather than later, I relish the idea of continuing the discussion because I'm very much concerned about precedent or no, as George would say. So we will take it up as a matter of old business, I think. We'll carry that on the agenda.
Okay.
I know it's partially philosophical, but I think it's for the benefit of the town in a very substantial way.
It would help, certainly help me as a new member in thinking about cases that come before us.
Yes, yes.
Move to adjourn, Mr. Chairman.
Is there a second? Any
Second.
discussion on the motion? Then all those in favor, well, I guess we have to have a separate vote. I vote yes. Ms. Eccles,
Yes.
Mr. Tom,
Yes.
Mr. Mulligan,
Yes.
Mr. Wall.
Yes.
Motion carries unanimously. Good night and Godspeed, members of the board.
Good night.
Thank you.